A chance encounter. Johnny wiped his hands on the stained apron he always wore in the kitchen. He stepped back from the grill, watching the last burger sizzle as it cooked to perfection. It had been a busy afternoon at his diner, and the steady rhythm of orders, sizzling food, and the hum of lively conversations filled the air. The restaurant had a warm, inviting atmosphere, a place where locals came for comfort food, but also for the familiarity of the kind-hearted man behind the counter. Johnny had put everything he had into making his diner a success. His mind drifted for a moment as he gazed around the room. He thought about the early days, when the diner had barely been a dream, just a glimmer in his eyes. It hadn't been easy to get to this point. In fact, there were days when Johnny wasn't sure if he could keep going. But now, as he looked at the smiling faces of his customers and the satisfied crew hustling in the back, he knew it had all been worth it. "Order up." Marge's voice broke him from his thoughts. She was his most loyal waitress, with a smile that could light up the whole room. She hurried past him, trays piled high with steaming plates of food, a familiar routine for both of them. Johnny glanced at her as he turned to grab the next order. "Coming right up, Marge," he called with a smile. It was then that the bell above the door chimed. A few customers glanced up, but Johnny's attention immediately shifted to the woman who had just stepped into his diner. She was a striking figure, tall and slender, with smooth, dark skin that seemed to catch the light as she entered. There was something almost ethereal about her, as though she carried with her an air of quiet confidence, despite the evident nervousness in her movements. Her eyes scanned the room briefly, as though uncertain, before landing on the counter where Johnny stood. She wore a worn-out coat that was clearly too thin for the chilly weather, and her scuffed shoes told a story of their own. Yet, despite the signs of wear and tear on her clothing, there was something undeniably graceful about the way she held herself. She moved with purpose but also hesitation, her posture a balance of hope and doubt. Johnny felt his heartbeat pick up, not just because of her beauty, though that was undeniable, but because of something deeper, something in the way she carried herself, like she was on a mission. She wasn't just here to fill an empty seat, she was here to claim something for herself. "Welcome to Johnny's Diner," he greeted warmly, his voice cutting through the clattering dishes and murmurs of other patrons. He smiled, hoping to put her at ease. "What can I get for you today?" The woman hesitated, glancing at the menu board above him, and then met his gaze. Her eyes were a striking shade of brown, deep and expressive, like they held a lifetime of untold stories. "Just a coffee, please," she said, her voice soft yet firm. There was a trace of uncertainty in the way she spoke, but Johnny caught the spark of determination that flickered in her eyes. "Black." Johnny nodded, moving to pour her coffee, the steam rising in the air. As he did, he couldn't help but take in the way she stood, quiet, poised, but with a subtle tension that suggested she was carrying the weight of something important. He set the mug in front of her and leaned slightly forward. "New in town?" he asked casually, trying to start a conversation. The woman paused, then nodded. "Just got here yesterday," she said, her words slow as though she was weighing how much to reveal. "I'm Ashley." "Nice to meet you, Ashley," Johnny replied, a friendly smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He couldn't help but feel intrigued by this woman who seemed to carry so much within her, yet remained composed. "What brings you to our little town?" Ashley took a sip of her coffee, her fingers wrapped around the warm mug, as though she was drawing comfort from it. "I'm hoping to find work. As a model." Johnny raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "A model, huh?" He couldn't hide his curiosity. There was something captivating about the way she spoke, like she truly believed in the possibility of it. "That's quite a dream." Ashley's eyes sparkled for a moment as she smiled, and for a brief second, Johnny could see the glimmer of something far greater than just ambition. It was the fire of someone who wasn't afraid to dream big. "It is," she said, her voice soft yet filled with quiet confidence. "But I'm determined to make it happen. I know it won't be easy, but I'm not afraid of hard work." There was something in her words that struck a chord with Johnny. He had seen his fair share of dreamers in the diner, some who came and went, never quite making it, never quite finding the courage to push through. But Ashley's demeanor was different. She wasn't asking for anyone's approval or sympathy. She wasn't waiting for anyone to hand her a silver spoon or pave the way for her. She was determined to carve her own path. Johnny leaned against the counter, his interest piqued. "Well, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that nothing comes easy. But if you're willing to put in the work, you can make just about anything happen." Ashley smiled again, this time more openly. "That's the plan." They talked for a few minutes longer, about Ashley's background and why she had decided to pursue modeling. She didn't come from money. In fact, she had left behind a life that hadn't offered her many opportunities. She had grown up in a small town, always feeling like she was destined for something more, something bigger. But the path to that dream had never been clear. Until now. Johnny found himself fascinated not just by Ashley's dream, but by her. Her resilience, her unwavering belief in herself, and the quiet strength she carried even in the face of doubt. She wasn't just chasing a fantasy. She was building something real, brick by brick, step by step. He admired that about her. Over the next few weeks, Ashley became a regular at Johnny's diner. She wasn't just stopping by for a cup of coffee anymore. Every day, she would come in, sit at the same booth near the window, and write in a small notebook. Sometimes she sketched, other times she worked on her resume, or just researched modeling agencies online. Johnny would catch glimpses of her from time to time, always deep in thought, always focused. There was something about Ashley's determination that made Johnny want to be there for her, to offer his support in whatever way he could. He saw how hard she worked, how much she pushed herself to make things happen. And he admired that. It reminded him of his younger self, when he had first started dreaming of running his own diner, when the odds were against him, and everyone told him it was a bad idea. One day, as Johnny was preparing lunch orders in the kitchen, Marge came up behind him with a tray of drinks. "That Ashley girl's in here again," she said with a knowing smile. "Seems like she's always here, doesn't she?" Johnny smiled, his eyes lingering on Ashley as she sat at her booth. "She's working hard. You can tell she's determined." Marge raised an eyebrow. "You like her, don't you?" Johnny froze, glancing over at Marge. She had a way of cutting through the noise and getting straight to the heart of things. Johnny didn't answer right away, but his silence spoke volumes. "I can see it," Marge said softly. "She's got something special, and so do you, Johnny. Don't let that slip away." Johnny felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He wasn't sure where this was going, but he couldn't deny that there was something about Ashley that made him want to believe in the impossible again. As the days passed, Johnny found himself thinking more and more about Ashley, about the way she carried herself, about her dreams, and about the way his heart raced every time she walked into the diner. He wasn't sure what would come of it, but one thing was certain: there was something between them, something that neither of them could ignore. And as Johnny handed Ashley her coffee one more time, he knew that this was just the beginning of something neither of them had expected, but both of them had needed. The bonds that grow. As the days turned into weeks, Johnny found himself drawn to Ashley in a way he hadn't expected. The attraction was more than just physical, though, of course. Her beauty never went unnoticed. But it was the way she carried herself, the quiet determination in her eyes, and the passion she exuded for her dreams that left him in awe. She wasn't like the women he had known before, or the ones who often came into his diner with their own set of expectations. Ashley was different. She had a raw, unpolished drive that resonated with him deeply. Johnny would often catch himself glancing over at her as she sat at her usual booth, hunched over her notebook or typing furiously on her laptop. Despite the challenges she faced, she never seemed to lose hope. In fact, every day she seemed to get more focused, more determined. She would talk to Johnny whenever she had a free moment, and their conversations often revolved around her dreams of becoming a model. Though Johnny's life was grounded in the reality of his diner, Ashley's world seemed full of possibility and excitement. He found that listening to her made him feel as though he, too, could do anything if he set his mind to it. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and he admired the way she never doubted herself, even when things weren't going smoothly. One afternoon, Johnny found himself sitting with Ashley for the first time outside of the diner. She had been working on a few new sketches for some of the modeling agencies she had contacted, and after seeing her struggle with a few details, Johnny suggested they take a break and go for a walk in the nearby park. It was rare for Johnny to have time away from the restaurant, but there was something about the way Ashley had been tirelessly working that made him feel he needed to offer her a change of scenery. "Sometimes you need to step away from something to see it clearly," Johnny said as they walked side by side, the cool air of early autumn swirling around them. The park was quiet, with only the soft rustle of leaves in the trees and the distant hum of traffic to break the silence. Ashley nodded, her eyes scanning the surroundings, though her mind seemed to be elsewhere. "I don't know if I can make this happen, Johnny," she admitted quietly, her voice betraying a rare moment of vulnerability. "I keep getting rejected by agencies. Some don't even respond. Others say I'm not what they're looking for. I've sent out so many applications, but nothing seems to stick." Johnny watched her carefully, sensing the weight of her frustration. He had known what it felt like to be knocked down time and time again, but he also knew what it was like to rise back up each time. "Ashley," he said softly, stopping for a moment and turning to face her, "you've got something no one can take away from you. The world might not always recognize your worth right away, but don't let that make you doubt yourself. Keep pushing. It'll happen." She looked at him for a long moment, as though weighing his words. Finally, she let out a sigh and gave a small, appreciative smile. "I appreciate you, Johnny. You've been so kind to me. I don't think many people would have taken the time to encourage me like you have." Johnny smiled back, his heart warming. "Sometimes you need someone to believe in you when you can't believe in yourself. And it's clear to me that you've got something special." They continued their walk in companionable silence for a while, enjoying the peace of the park. Johnny couldn't help but notice how beautiful Ashley was, not just in appearance, but in spirit. She was so much more than the struggles she faced. She was a force of nature. And yet, despite all her strength, there was still a quiet tenderness to her that made Johnny feel protective. As they returned to the diner, Ashley's expression had lightened. She seemed more at ease, and Johnny felt a sense of pride at being able to offer her that small escape from the intensity of her pursuit. She was determined, and Johnny knew that would take her far. But even the most determined people needed moments of respite. In the weeks that followed, Johnny and Ashley's bond deepened. They would often spend evenings talking about their lives, about the dreams they once had, and the ones they still held. Johnny had grown up in a small working-class neighborhood. He had never imagined himself owning a diner, but after years of saving, planning, and relentless hard work, he had made it happen. There had been sacrifices along the way, moments when he had questioned whether it was all worth it. But now, standing in the heart of his success, Johnny knew he had made the right choice. Ashley's story was different, but not dissimilar. She had grown up in a world where dreams were often dismissed as foolish. Her family had struggled to make ends meet, and she had seen firsthand how easy it was to give up on something because the world seemed intent on knocking you down. But Ashley had always held on to her belief in herself. She never let go of the idea that she could create her own future, no matter how many closed doors she encountered. One day, as the diner closed for the night, Johnny found Ashley sitting at the counter, her head in her hands, eyes closed in frustration. "What's going on?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice. Ashley looked up, her face tired but still carrying that spark. "I got an offer," she said, the words hanging in the air between them. "But it's not exactly what I hoped for. A small agency in the city wants me to come in for a photo shoot, but it's not the kind of thing I had in mind. It's a lot of cheap glamour shots. Nothing that's going to get me the work I want." Johnny's heart ached for her, But he also admired the way she refused to settle. "You're not going to just take anything, are you?" She shook her head, a small, resolute smile playing on her lips. "No, I'm not. I don't want to be known for one kind of look. I want something more. I want to build a career, not just a moment in the spotlight." Johnny leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "Good. Keep pushing for what you believe in. Don't settle. You're going to get there. And when you do, it'll be because you stayed true to yourself, not because someone else told you that's the way it's supposed to be." Ashley's eyes softened as she looked at him, her smile growing a little wider. "Thank you, Johnny. You really do believe in me, don't you?" Johnny met her gaze and nodded. "I do. I see something in you, Ashley. Something the world hasn't recognized yet. But it will. And when it does, it'll be because you never gave up." As the days passed, Johnny's belief in Ashley grew, and so did his feelings for her. What started as a connection based on mutual respect and admiration soon blossomed into something deeper, something undeniable. But even as Johnny's feelings for Ashley grew, he knew that she had a long road ahead of her. The world could be cruel, and the pursuit of dreams was never as easy as it seemed. There would be setbacks, more rejections, and perhaps moments of doubt. But Johnny would be there, standing by her side, cheering her on every step of the way. He had no idea where this journey would take them, but for the first time in a long time, Johnny felt something more than just hope. He felt the certainty that Ashley's dreams were no longer impossible. They were just waiting to be realized. And he wanted to be there, witnessing it all, taking risks and facing reality. As weeks turned into months, Ashley's perseverance continued to drive her forward, even as the rejections piled up. Every no was a reminder of how far she still had to go, but Johnny had seen the way her eyes sparkled every time she spoke about her goals, and he knew that she wouldn't give up, no matter how tough it got. What truly struck him was her ability to remain kind and grounded despite the overwhelming odds. The industry she was trying to break into wasn't easy, and the world of modeling could be brutal, especially for someone with no connections, no rich parents, and no glamorous background. Still, Ashley's heart was determined. She didn't need the fame or fortune that so many others in the industry sought. All she wanted was to create a space for herself in a world that told her she wasn't enough. Johnny admired that she was so much more than her dreams. Her self-respect, her drive, and her unwillingness to conform were all qualities that made her stand out in a world that often felt too crowded with shallow ideals. But despite Ashley's perseverance, things were starting to get harder. One chilly evening in early winter, Ashley walked into the diner. Her shoulders slumped, a far-off look in her eyes. Johnny immediately noticed the change. It wasn't just her usual quiet confidence. There was something heavy on her. "Hey, Ashley." Johnny greeted her with a soft smile, wiping his hands on his apron. "What can I get you today?" Ashley glanced up at him, her eyes slightly unfocused. She shook her head. "Just some coffee, Johnny. Black." Johnny poured the coffee without a word, noticing how her gaze kept drifting to the window, as if she were lost in thought. The bell above the door chimed again, signaling the arrival of new customers, but Johnny couldn't focus on them. He set the coffee in front of Ashley and waited, the silence between them feeling heavy. She finally looked up at him, her lips pressed together in a tight line. "I'm not sure how much longer I can keep doing this," she confessed quietly, her voice carrying a weight that Johnny hadn't heard before. "I've spent months sending out portfolios, going to casting calls, but the only offers I get are for things I don't want to be part of. I'm just so tired of hearing not enough. Too much, too this, too that. I'm starting to wonder if it's ever going to happen." Johnny leaned against the counter, his expression softening as he listened. This wasn't just about modeling anymore. It was about dreams, self-worth, and the constant struggle to feel like what you were doing mattered. "Ashley," Johnny said gently, "it's going to be hard. You know that. The world doesn't always see us the way we want to be seen, and sometimes the fight feels like it's never going to end. But I see you, and I see what you're trying to do. Don't let anyone make you question that. The right opportunity will come. You just have to keep going." Ashley met his gaze, her eyes shining with unchecked tears. "I want to believe that, Johnny. I really do. But what if it doesn't come? What if I've been chasing something that's impossible? What if I'm just setting myself up for failure?" Johnny placed a hand on the counter, a comforting but firm gesture. "Then you keep chasing it anyway," he said simply. "Because what's the alternative? Giving up? Regret is far worse than failure. You're chasing something big, something important, and even if it doesn't come the way you expect, it will come in some form. I believe that about you, Ashley." There was a long pause as Ashley seemed to process his words. Finally, she nodded, her expression softening, though the doubt still lingered in her eyes. "Thanks, Johnny. I needed to hear that." Johnny smiled warmly, then leaned forward slightly. "You're welcome. Just remember, you've got this." The following week, Johnny received some unexpected news. A local photographer who had done work for a few national brands was coming to the diner. A mutual friend had recommended Johnny's place, and the photographer was looking for a location to do a private, impromptu photo shoot. When Johnny heard this, his mind immediately flashed to Ashley. The opportunity was small, but it could be the chance she had been waiting for. He called Ashley that afternoon. "Ashley, are you free tomorrow afternoon?" Johnny asked. "There's a photographer who wants to do a shoot, and they need a model. I think this could be a great chance for you to get some exposure. Nothing huge, just a casual shoot, but you never know what it could lead to." Ashley was quiet for a moment, processing the offer. Then, in a voice full of hesitation, she replied, "I don't know, Johnny. I've been through so many shoots that didn't go anywhere. I'm just not sure it's worth it." Johnny's heart went out to her. He understood the exhaustion in her voice, the deep fear of getting her hopes up only to face more rejection. But he also knew that this could be the break she needed. "Ashley, I get it. I know you've had your heart broken by the business, but this could be your shot. It's a small opportunity, but sometimes the smallest things lead to bigger ones. Don't let fear hold you back from seeing what could come of this." There was another long pause before Ashley sighed. "Okay, I'll do it. I'll come. But if it doesn't lead to anything, I'm not going to be crushed again, Johnny. I can't afford that." Johnny understood. "Just take it one step at a time. No pressure. You go, you show up, and you do what you love. That's all anyone can ask." The next day, as Johnny worked in the diner, he kept glancing toward the door, watching for Ashley's arrival. He couldn't shake the feeling that this could be the turning point she needed. When she walked in, dressed simply but beautifully, Johnny could see the uncertainty in her eyes, but also a flicker of excitement. She had made the decision to go for it. The photographer arrived shortly after, a quiet, middle-aged man with a sharp eye for detail. He introduced himself, and after some brief conversation, he set up his camera equipment in a corner of the diner. The shoot was to be simple, some candid shots with natural lighting, nothing too elaborate, but Ashley was nervous nonetheless. Johnny could see it in the way she fidgeted with her clothes and shifted from foot to foot. "Just relax," Johnny said quietly, leaning close to her as the photographer prepared the first shot. "You're incredible. Don't forget that." Ashley smiled at him, a grateful look crossing her face, before turning her attention to the photographer. Over the next hour, the photographer snapped several pictures, some candid, some posed. Johnny kept his distance, watching from the counter, his heart swelling with pride. He could tell that Ashley had found her rhythm, slowly but surely. She was more than just a model now. She was someone stepping into her power. And even though it wasn't a high-profile shoot, it was a step forward. It was proof that she could make it, even if no one else saw her potential yet. As the shoot wrapped up, the photographer nodded with approval. "Great job, Ashley. I think we got some good shots. I'll send you some of the best ones by the end of the week." Ashley beamed, her eyes lighting up with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "Really? You think so?" "Definitely," the photographer said, packing away his camera. "You've got a natural presence. Keep pushing." Once the photographer left, Johnny walked over to Ashley, a proud grin on his face. "See, you've got this. One small step closer." Ashley's smile was almost radiant. "I didn't think I could do it. But maybe you're right, Johnny. Maybe this is the start of something." Johnny's heart skipped a beat. "I told you it would come. And you were ready for it when it did." The day ended quietly, but for both Ashley and Johnny, something had shifted. The weight of doubt was still there, but it was now countered by the certainty of possibility. And for the first time in a long while, they both felt like they were on the verge of something much bigger than they had ever imagined. The road ahead would still be tough, but with each passing day, the impossible was beginning to feel a little more within reach. The unexpected path. As the days turned into weeks, the small shoot that Ashley had nervously agreed to turned into something much more significant than either she or Johnny had anticipated. The photographer, a quiet but experienced man named Robert, had indeed followed through on his promise. He sent Ashley several of the photos, some raw, some edited, each one more captivating than the last. She was stunned when she saw them. The way the light played off her skin, the way her posture conveyed strength, grace, and confidence, qualities she hadn't fully recognized in herself until she saw it through Robert's lens. And what surprised her even more was the response those photos garnered. A few days after receiving them, she received a call from a talent scout who had seen the photos online. He was impressed with her natural look and wanted to meet her in person. For the first time in months, Ashley felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't just another fluke. This was an opportunity, an invitation to something that could actually change the course of her life. When she told Johnny about the call, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. He had always believed in her, but seeing her take that first real step towards her dream made everything feel more tangible. For so long, he had watched Ashley battle against the tide of rejection, but now, for the first time, it seemed like the tide was beginning to shift. "You're going to do great, Ashley," Johnny told her, his voice full of encouragement. "This is just the beginning. You've got everything it takes." Ashley, still processing the surreal nature of the call, smiled at him, a spark of excitement igniting in her eyes. "I don't know what's happening, Johnny, but I'm going to give it my all. I've waited for something like this for so long." The day of her meeting with the talent scout arrived quickly. Johnny, ever the supportive presence, insisted on driving her to the agency. He knew how overwhelming these first steps could be, and he wanted to make sure she had someone by her side. The whole ride there, Ashley seemed to bounce between nervousness and excitement, fidgeting with her hair and smoothing down her dress, though Johnny could see how much she had grown since that first awkward shoot. The woman sitting beside him now was confident, poised, and ready. "Whatever happens in there, just remember this. You've already won," Johnny said as he parked outside the building. Ashley turned to him, her face a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "You really believe that, don't you?" Johnny nodded. "Absolutely. You've come so far already. This is just one more step." As they walked into the agency, Ashley's nerves seemed to settle. The waiting room was sleek, with large windows letting in streams of natural light. Modern, polished furniture adorned the space, and the walls were lined with portfolios of models, each picture more stunning than the last. Ashley took a deep breath as she signed in at the reception desk. Johnny sat beside her, offering a reassuring smile. When the door finally opened, a young man in his 30s stepped out and greeted them with a firm handshake. He had the air of someone who had seen it all, but still exuded an unapproachable confidence. "Ashley, right, I'm Luke. We're excited to meet you. Please, come on in," he said, guiding them through the door and into a bright office filled with mood boards, photographs, and brochures. There were magazines strewn across the desk, and a large polished table sat in the center of the room. Ashley tried to keep her composure, though the weight of the moment pressed down on her chest. Luke had been reviewing her online portfolio, and his eyes lit up when he looked at her again. "I have to say, you've got something different about you, Ashley. You've got the look and the attitude that we think will translate well in this industry." Ashley's heart fluttered at his words, but she did her best not to let it show. "Thank you, Luke. I've worked really hard for this." Luke nodded, flipping through a few more pages of her portfolio. "I can see that. We have a few opportunities coming up, catalog shoots, some runway work, but there's also a new campaign we're doing for a high-end fashion brand. We're looking for someone who's willing to take risks and bring something fresh to the table. The work won't be easy, and the hours can be grueling. But I think you might be a perfect fit." Johnny watched Ashley, proud of how she held her own. This was it, the chance she had been waiting for, the one she almost didn't believe would come, the one she had doubted so many times in the past. He knew that Ashley was on the cusp of something big, and he was there to witness it. Luke's voice broke through his thoughts. "So here's what I'm thinking. We'll schedule a test shoot in a few weeks. If it goes well, we'll move forward with the campaign and start getting you some bigger gigs." Ashley blinked in surprise. "A test shoot? You think I'm ready for that?" "Of course," Luke said with a smile. "The question is, are you ready for it?" Ashley's heart raced, her thoughts swirling in a mixture of excitement and fear. This was everything she had worked for, but it also felt terrifying. "I'm ready," she said, her voice more confident than she felt. "I'll give it everything I've got." Luke smiled and stood up. "Great. We'll be in touch soon. I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do, Ashley." As they left the building, Ashley felt her legs tremble slightly. She had made it through the door, but she was keenly aware that this was just the beginning. She had to prove herself, and that would require every ounce of determination she had. Johnny was waiting for her in the lobby, his smile as wide as hers. "You did it, Ashley. You've taken the first step into something amazing. I knew you could do it." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I can't believe it. This is real. But there's still so much to do." Johnny nodded, understanding. "One step at a time. You've got this, and I'll be here every step of the way." As they walked out into the crisp afternoon air, the possibilities ahead of them seemed endless. Ashley's dream wasn't just a fantasy anymore. It was taking shape, becoming something tangible. The next few weeks would be filled with anticipation, with nerves and excitement, but for the first time in a long time, Ashley could see a future where she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Johnny had been her anchor through all of this, the person who believed in her when she doubted herself, the person who encouraged her when she was ready to give up. And now, as they stood side by side, ready to face the unknown, Ashley realized something profound. She hadn't just been chasing a dream all this time. She had been building a life. Her life. One step, one decision, one leap of faith at a time. And the road ahead, with all its twists and turns, was one she was ready to walk. Unforeseen challenges. The weeks that followed Ashley's meeting with the talent scout were a whirlwind of excitement and nerves. Each day seemed to bring something new. A call for a casting, a request for more photos, a new offer that pushed her closer to realizing the dream she had chased for so long. But with each new opportunity came the same nagging fear. Would she be enough? Would this chance slip through her fingers like the many others before it? Despite her deep-seated doubts, one thing was certain. Ashley wasn't giving up. She couldn't afford to. This was the moment she had been waiting for, and she would give everything she had to make sure it counted. The test shoot Luke had promised was set for a Tuesday morning, and Ashley arrived at the agency with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She had spent the last few days preparing herself mentally, reminding herself that this was just another step forward, not a final judgment on her abilities. Johnny had been her rock throughout it all, constantly reassuring her, offering words of encouragement whenever the anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. "Remember, Ashley," Johnny had said the night before the shoot, "this isn't about perfection. It's about showing who you are and what you bring to the table. They're looking for someone with heart, not just a pretty face." Those words had stuck with her as she entered the studio, the bright lights and the hum of the photographer's equipment filling the air. There was a palpable energy in the room, a sense of controlled chaos that she had to quickly adjust to. The team was setting up a backdrop, discussing angles, and adjusting lighting. It was a world so different from the quiet comfort of Johnny's diner, but it felt exhilarating. Ashley was ushered into a dressing room, where a makeup artist helped her with her look. She gazed at her reflection in the mirror, a mixture of excitement and nerves swirling inside her. She had never worn this much makeup before. Her natural beauty had always been enough, but she trusted the professionals. The makeup artist was kind and talkative, and before long, Ashley felt at ease in her hands. When the shoot finally began, Ashley's nerves were still present, but they had transformed into something more manageable. Focus. She listened to the photographer's instructions, adjusting her posture, trying different expressions, each one different from the last. She found herself surprised at how much she enjoyed the process. There was something liberating about being in front of the camera, about expressing herself in a way that wasn't about words but about emotions, about the stories her body and face could tell. However, despite her growing comfort, the session wasn't without its challenges. After a few rounds of shots, the photographer paused, looking over his camera. "Let's try something different," he suggested. "I want you to bring more intensity. Make the shot feel alive, like you're really feeling something." Ashley froze for a moment. Intensity. She wasn't entirely sure what that meant in the context of the shoot. She had always been taught to remain composed, to stay graceful and poised. But this was different. She had to push past her comfort zone, had to dig deep and tap into something raw. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. The photographer's voice echoed in her mind. "Feel it." She thought about her journey, about the long nights of doubting herself, the cold stares from people who didn't believe in her, the uncertainty that had plagued her every step of the way. She thought about Johnny and how he always had faith in her, even when she didn't. And most of all, she thought about the dreams that had kept her going through it all. When she opened her eyes again, she felt different. There was a fire in her that hadn't been there before. She channeled all the frustration, the exhaustion, and the determination that had built up inside her, and she let it flow into her expressions. The photographer snapped away, and this time, the energy in the room shifted. Everyone stopped to take notice. There was a spark, something captivating in her eyes, something real in her movements. As the shoot came to an end, Ashley felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't expected. It had been challenging, yes, but she had pushed herself in a way that was completely unfamiliar, and it had paid off. As she changed out of her outfit and started to leave the studio, she couldn't help but smile. She didn't know what would happen next, but she had given her all. Later that evening, Ashley was sitting at Johnny's diner, the weight of the day sinking in as she pored over the photos from the shoot. Johnny had promised to be there for her. And as always, he showed up right on time, his smile wide, as he took a seat across from her. "So, how did it go?" Johnny asked, his voice full of anticipation. Ashley sighed, trying to contain her excitement. "It went better than I expected. I didn't think I'd be able to bring the intensity the photographer wanted, but I did it. I really dug deep and let myself feel the emotions. It felt powerful. I don't know how it will turn out, but I know I did my best." Johnny smiled, a look of pride in his eyes. "That's all you can do, Ashley. You gave it everything. And that's what matters." They sat in silence for a while, just the comforting hum of the diner and the clink of plates in the background. Johnny could see the uncertainty still in her eyes, but he also saw something new, a confidence, a knowing that she was capable of more than she had ever given herself credit for. The next day, the call came. Ashley's heart skipped a beat when her phone buzzed. She answered quickly, hoping that she wasn't imagining the excitement in the voice on the other end. "Ashley, it's Luke. I wanted to let you know that we're moving forward with you for the campaign. We're impressed with your work, and we think you've got the potential to make a real impact." Ashley was stunned. It felt like the ground beneath her shifted, and for a moment, she thought she might faint. But her excitement quickly turned into disbelief. "Wait, really? You're going to use my photos for the campaign?" "Yes. You were fantastic. The intensity you brought to the shoot was exactly what we needed. We want you on board for this. I'll send you all the details, but we're looking at a major runway show next month, followed by the campaign shoot itself. This could be the big break you've been waiting for." Tears pricked at the corners of Ashley's eyes. She had done it. The impossible was happening, but she had no idea that this success would soon lead to a challenge far greater than any she had faced before. As Ashley walked into Johnny's diner later that day, she couldn't wait to share the news. Johnny had always been her biggest supporter, and now she had something to celebrate. But as she stepped into the warm glow of the diner, she was greeted with a strange feeling. Something wasn't right. The usual buzz of conversation seemed subdued, and the faces around the room seemed to carry a look of uncertainty. Johnny, who had been preparing an order behind the counter, turned when he saw her. He smiled at first, but that smile quickly faded when he noticed her expression. "Hey, what's wrong?" Johnny asked, his concern obvious. Ashley couldn't bring herself to tell him immediately, but the silence between them was palpable. "Johnny," she finally whispered, "it's all happening. I've got the campaign. I'm going to be in a major runway show next month. But there's something I need to tell you." Johnny walked over, his brow furrowed. "What's going on, Ashley? What is it?" She looked up at him, the weight of the decision she had to make sitting heavily on her shoulders. "It's not just about the modeling anymore. This is getting big, too big. And I don't know if I can balance this with everything else in my life. There are going to be so many people pulling me in different directions. It's not just the modeling industry I have to contend with now. It's the life I've built, the people who are going to start depending on me. And what happens to us, Johnny?" Johnny's heart ached as he looked at her. He knew she was facing a storm of uncertainty, but he also knew that she had the strength to weather it. "Whatever happens, Ashley, we'll handle it. You're not in this alone. You've got me. Always." The unspoken promise between them was more powerful than anything else in the world. As the door of the diner chimed with the arrival of a customer, Ashley realized that her path was only just beginning, but with Johnny by her side, she knew that she had the strength to take on whatever came next. And so, they faced the unknown together, ready to see where this journey would lead. Standing on the edge. The days following Ashley's big break were a blur of excitement, paperwork, photo shoots, and constant travel. The life she had dreamed of was unfolding in front of her, but it wasn't without its struggles. The model industry was as fierce and demanding as she had imagined. The competition was fierce, the hours long, and the pressure to stay at the top was relentless. Yet, with every obstacle, Ashley's resilience grew stronger. She had worked too hard, fought too long, and overcome too much to let anything stand in her way. Still, with each passing day, Ashley felt herself slipping farther and farther away from the life she had once known. Johnny's diner, the place where they had first met, felt like a distant memory. There were days when she couldn't even find the time to return his calls. Her schedule was becoming more packed, and her face was appearing in more magazines and advertisements. The world was starting to recognize her talent, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for the world to recognize her at all. Johnny, always patient, never pressured her. He knew that the life she had once dreamed of was taking shape before her eyes, and he was proud of her for going after it with everything she had. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping between them. He had watched Ashley grow into the woman she was now, and he had always been her biggest cheerleader. But with her success came distance. As she became more successful, the more she seemed to drift away from the person who had stood by her when no one else believed in her. One chilly evening, weeks after the campaign had been launched, Ashley found herself sitting alone in a hotel room in New York City. The city buzzed around her, the sound of traffic and the hum of voices seeping through the thick windows. She stared at her phone, scrolling through countless messages, most of them from her team, some from friends she had made in the industry. But there was one message that stood out. It was from Johnny. "I miss you, Ashley. I know you're doing amazing things, and I'm so proud of you. But I haven't heard from you in days. I just wanted to check in." The text hit her hard. She hadn't meant to let the space between them grow so wide, but the whirlwind of her success had overwhelmed her. She had been so focused on her career, on making it in a world that hadn't wanted her, that she had lost sight of what really mattered, what had always mattered. Johnny had been there for her when the dream felt impossible, when she was stuck in the back booth of that small diner, her only escape being the flickering lights of a hope that seemed as dim as the evening sun. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, and then, without thinking, she typed back, "I miss you too. I've been so caught up in everything, but I promise, I haven't forgotten about us." She sat back against the bed, feeling the weight of her choices and the consequences of her decisions. It wasn't just about her anymore. The world had opened up to her in ways she had only imagined, but the world she had once shared with Johnny, her safe space, her anchor, was slipping away from her. That night, as she lay in bed staring up at the ceiling, she thought about everything she had achieved and everything she had left behind. The bright lights of New York and the flashing cameras no longer seemed so appealing. They had never been the dream. The dream had always been simple, a life where she could make something of herself, find her own path, and maybe, just maybe, share that path with someone who truly understood her. And for so long, that someone had been Johnny. The next morning, after a long night of tossing and turning, Ashley called Johnny. She could hear the surprise in his voice when he picked up. "Hey," Johnny answered, his tone cautious but warm. "How's the city treating you?" Ashley's heart tightened. "It's a lot. I've been so wrapped up in everything, Johnny. The shoots, the events, the interviews. I just realized how much I've been pulling away from everything that really matters. From you." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Johnny had always been able to sense when she was struggling, even when she couldn't find the words to express it. "I get it, Ash," Johnny said softly. "You've worked hard for this, and I know you're just trying to make the most of every opportunity that comes your way. But I miss you. I miss the Ashley who used to walk through that diner door every day with all her dreams and doubts in tow." Ashley closed her eyes, feeling tears prickle at the corners of her eyes. She had been so focused on proving herself that she had forgotten about the very things that had kept her grounded, the love and support of the people who had always been there for her. "I'm sorry, Johnny. I don't want to lose us. I don't want to lose you," she whispered. Johnny's voice softened. "I don't want to lose us either, Ashley. But you've got to find a way to balance this new life with the one you've built. I know you can have both. You just have to remember where you come from and who you are, no matter how big things get." The conversation lingered in the air long after the call ended, the weight of his words sinking deep within her. She knew he was right. She couldn't lose herself in this new world she had entered. She couldn't let her success change the person she had fought so hard to become. More importantly, she couldn't let the person who had believed in her from the start slip away. Ashley made a decision that afternoon. She would go back to the diner. She would take the time to reconnect with Johnny, to remember the person she had been before all the fame, the lights, the photographers, and the interviews. Johnny was the man who had seen her for who she truly was, even when she couldn't see it herself. The following day, Ashley boarded a flight back to the small town where she and Johnny had first met. She had an important shoot the next day, but for now, she needed a moment to reconnect with the roots she had almost forgotten. When she walked into Johnny's diner, The familiar smell of fresh coffee and sizzling burgers filled the air, and she immediately felt at home. Johnny was behind the counter, as usual, his apron tied loosely around his waist, and a faint smile crept onto his face as he saw her enter. She walked toward him, feeling the weight of the past weeks lifting as she closed the distance between them. "Ashley," Johnny said, his voice full of relief. "I wasn't sure if you'd make it back." "I needed to," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I missed this. I missed us." Johnny walked around the counter, pulling her into a hug, his warmth and familiar scent grounding her in a way nothing else could. "You don't have to apologize. You've been chasing your dreams. I get it. Just don't forget about what really matters. Don't forget about who you are." "I won't," she whispered, feeling the tears well up in her eyes. "I promise I won't." They stood there for a moment, their embrace comforting and secure, as the world outside seemed to fade into the background. In that moment, Ashley realized that no matter how much success she achieved or how far she went, the love and support of the people who cared about her were the real foundation of everything. It was a reminder she needed, a reminder that her journey wasn't just about the fame or the spotlight, but about staying true to herself and to the people who had always been there for her. She wasn't just building a life for herself. She was building a life with Johnny, and that was the most important part of it all. With Johnny by her side, Ashley knew that whatever the future held, she would be able to face it with courage, strength, and the unwavering love that had always been there, waiting for her to return to it. And now, standing at the edge of it all, she was ready to take the next step, one that wouldn't pull her away from the things that truly mattered, but one that would lead her to a future she could share with the man who had believed in her when no one else did.